Hi, with Peter Carr on LTV's The Research Channel. Cloud computing is a topic we cover a lot on LTV and certainly for our clients in our wider advisory and research business. This week our Research Director Scott Stewart is in Silicon Valley at the 9th Annual Cloud Computing Expo. This particular expo started back in 2007 in New York City. Actually, they had 450 delegates at their first event only 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago now. So it's seen a lot of significant growth. A lot of vendors come together, a lot of practitioners, so it's a great litmus, I guess, for where the industry is internationally. So we might cross straight away to Scott over in Silicon Valley. Scott, can you hear us okay?
Yes, Pete, I can hear you loud and clear.
That's great, mate. Tell us something about the event you're attending this week.
I'm at the Cloud Computing Expo. It's pretty much the biggest cloud computing show there is in the world. There's 18,000 odd attendees. It's just a massive event. There's just 4 full days of just something on all the time, and they start at 7 in the morning and go through to 8 at night. And the whole conversation is about cloud, and obviously you be here long enough, you kind of get clouded out, but it's certainly very informative, and there's certainly a lot of interest. It's just a great event.
Okay, that sounds great. So it's been a few years now. We mentioned the first conference was in 2009. Would you say that the content from the presenters, the companies there, is still presenting cloud as a hyped topic, or are we starting to see some real traction, some real tangible examples of what's going on in the market?
It's so noticeable this year. At this conference that it is not hyped at all. In fact, the hype has seemed to really have gone away in a lot of regards. So it's kind of not like the Salesforce conference with the loud noises and the mascots and the clapping. It's really a very sensible, realistic approach to cloud, and there's a lot of really deep discussions on all the issues of cloud. And so it's really noticeable. And the other thing too is that just as the Longhouse research showed in Australia, that the enterprise adoption of cloud was slowing, I'm hearing the same thing over here, that it's really not the enterprises that are moving, big sort of clusters of workloads to cloud. In actual fact, it's still largely amongst the startups, websites, the test and development shops, but also pretty much anything new that enterprises are doing. So there was a case study of a deployment of 10,000 iPads into an organization, and obviously you're not going to set that kind of infrastructure up around the hosting of the applications and the data for that. So all that is cloud, and it's a great use case. It's a great example of how cloud can provide time to market and agility, but it seems to be the new things and not so much a lot of legacy remediation. It seems to be a real bottom-up push. In other words, bottom up from the test and the dev and the startup area, and it's hitting the enterprise ICT space and starting to really sort of get some pushback. It's starting to really kind of slow down. And hence, private cloud is definitely the thing that most people are talking about doing.
Great. So look, it's probably fair to say, based on what we've been seeing in Australia, the mobility and the iPad app, or the application of those in the enterprise has been expected. Has there been any changes away from the trusted infrastructure focus of cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot more focus here on service management and service assurance, monitoring. It's less now about provisioning and deployment. Of course, that's still very important, and there's still a lot of displays and exhibits and use cases around that. But you know, there's like, you know, two streams to cloud, and I think I know what Longhouse did recognise in the cloud report that there's this sort of cloud management, which is the provisioning and the virtualisation, the billing, elasticity, and the bursting, etc. But then there's this other around, you know, service management and assurance, and we're seeing a lot more here. And, you know, we've been talking about that for quite some time, that there needs to be greater focus on, you know, how well is your cloud being run. Well, it looks like that tide, you know, has finally changed, and there's much more equilibrium now. There's much more sort of realism about, you know, there are some real issues. Clouds will go down. So yeah, it's definitely very, very topical, and it's clearly a shift away from that kind of hype.
Okay, so you mentioned the clouds going down. Scott, are there any sessions that are focusing on the really tough questions around service restitution for when things don't go so well?
Yeah, look, SLAs, you know, there's been a lot of focus or discussion on SLAs, but in a sense, basically saying that, look, while it's really good to focus on SLAs, you know, securing a good set of SLAs is not going to stop a cloud outage, and in fact is more about the argy-bargy, you know, after the event. And this obsession that a lot of CIOs have about SLAs, it's kind of interesting. It's you know, to give you an example, there was a story here of a retailer who had an outage on their e-commerce, and they were out for about 12 hours, and that lost revenue cost to that retailer was $50 million. But the service credit that was repaid to that retailer from their cloud provider was about $300. So it does show that there is a disconnect, but I don't think the vendors are going to, you know, really realistically go down that path of providing restitution. Now they're starting to talk more about things like application, you know, engineering the applications for situations of failover, etc.
Okay, so what are we going to focus on though? If we're not going to focus on restitution and we're going to focus on highly redundant applications, then I guess my question is, shouldn't we have been focusing on that all along?
Yeah, it should have been. I think that there was this initial rush, you know, with a lot of the service providers, I guess, to you know, get a cloud product to market. And now with all this focus on, okay, you know, everyone's got a cloud product, and that's the case. So therefore, you know, what's the differentiation going to be? And it's going to be very, very much around this, what we're talking about around the outages, but it's also really about very much about the application. So there's a lot of service providers, a lot of talk, a lot of presentations around things like architecting your application for resource failure. So in other words, basically, you know, expect that the hang on, that's very loud here. I might just have to start that one again. Can you hear that? That's my plane. I missed it. I've got to go and catch it. No. Okay, so I'll start that again. So it's things like architecting your application for resource failure. So in other words, it's getting down to the actual architecture of the application so that they're you know, cloud enabled, but also they can continue performing if there is an individual resource failure. So, you know, redundancy of application, you know, means things like replicated database servers, you know, and using an application management framework that sort of instantly starts new instances, you know, to replace failed ones. So it's sort of moving to this sort of redundant topology that, you know, will be maintained in the event of an outage. There's a lot of talk now around application management frameworks, and a lot of this is now about, and I think it's really, obviously, it's to start to tackle the enterprise ICT that, you know, isn't moving to the cloud.
So one of the adjacent areas of that redundancy and failover issue has been the potential to use multiple cloud providers for the hosting of cloud services, whether they be infrastructure or applications. But the obvious impediment and challenge to that has been a lack of cloud standards. So are you seeing any sessions this week that talk about getting closer to that reality?
Everyone, not necessarily everyone, there's a lot of people are talking about that, and everyone is basically admitting that the cloud is not mature enough yet to support, we're not there yet. But it's clearly that is perhaps that's one of the maturity milestones for cloud, is that, if your cloud providers' infrastructure goes offline. Now, look, that's going to be really rare, but I think you do have to factor in that it could happen. So in that situation, the idea is that your application will switch to another provider. Now, because there's no standards, that's very, very difficult, and some might say impossible to achieve. But I think eventually there will be all sorts of middleware type providers that will be able to sort of provide this portability across providers. So, you can deal with an individual provider and clearly have multiple data centers, and you can have failover from one data center and that provider to the other. But what we're talking about now is actually failing over to a different provider, different data center, and it's very, very challenging. But everyone is in all the discussions I'm having here, they're all saying that's where we've got to get to. But how long off it will be, not too sure. But it's going to take a lot of architectural planning, architectural design, and all this sort of application management framework. Basically, applications are going to have to be rewritten, and there's a lot of noticeably some providers here in that space.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Look, we might finish on this point, but we had a quick chat yesterday, and you mentioned this emerging topic of API as a service. Now, APIs are obviously very important as a differentiator when we looked at the cloud market earlier this year. So can you tell us a little more about that?
Very, very interesting. If you think about a cloud provider, what are they? They really are a whole lot of APIs, so the application programming interfaces there. There are a whole lot of APIs sitting over the top of a whole lot of servers. So, cloud is basically a community of APIs, and so it was probably a natural progression, but certainly on the fringe, on the edge of the innovation in this sort of cloud story, we're seeing this API as a service. And what that is that if you can imagine you're an enterprise, you have a very robust workflow or business process. It could be, production of check payments. It could be processing transactions. It could be identity checks. It could be sort of any type of business process that you've nailed as an enterprise, and it's very efficient. Well, the concept of API management is actually converting that business process into an API, and then making it available to other organizations who need it. And the thing about it is you're commercializing, you're creating a new revenue stream. This is increasing the top line, not the typical cloud story where they talk about reducing the bottom line. And it's fantastic because enterprises will be able to protect their IP, because an API is just input and output. Businesses will be able to access all these APIs to build their business, and there are API managers. So there was an announcement here from a company called, sorry, I've totally lost it. Okay, I'll pick that up again. So there was an announcement here at Cloud Expo from a company called SOA Software. They're a subsidiary of Service Mesh. They do a lot of work in Australia, notably the CBA, that's no secret. And they've implemented or introduced a new product called Atmosphere. So it's atmos.phe.re. And it's an API management portal. And so they want to take the management of these APIs, which become commercial commodities that can be traded and accessed, and basically opening new revenue streams for business. Yeah, it's a fascinating concept.
That's great. Okay, well, enjoy the rest of your time in Santa Clara, and we'll see you when you get back.
Thanks, Pete.
So one of the clearest things to come out of Cloud Expo this year has been not just new topics coming out, so the cloud movement itself continues to move forward, but also there's a number of new players coming out, and we're quite excited to have made contact with them in North America, and we will be evaluating some of these new companies in our 2012 edition of the Trusted Infrastructure as a Service Pulse, which the research which is starting now and will be released in February 2012 in events across Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra. So hopefully you can join us then, but we'll certainly do another follow-up show to talk about some of those vendors next week when Scott returns from America.